room, a wave of heat washing over him like a physical assault. The air hung thick and stagnant, heavy with the smell of sweat and despair. He longed for a breeze, a single breath of fresh air in this suffocating city, but the very thought seemed like a distant luxury. He had to get out, escape the confines of these four walls that seemed to press in on him, reminding him of his failures, his poverty, his shame. He moved quickly, his footsteps echoing on the creaking wooden stairs. He dared not look back, fearing the landlady's watchful eye, an eye that seemed to see right through him, judging his every move, his every debt. He could practically feel her gaze burning into his back, a constant reminder of his overdue rent, a burden he carried heavier than any physical weight. He owed her money, money he didn't have, money he was desperate to find. He emerged onto the street, a wave of humanity washing over him. The noise was overwhelming, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the shouts of vendors hawking their wares, the distant rumble of the city coming to life. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat to some unknown battle. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to disappear into the anonymity of the crowd. He owed money not just to the landlady but to others as well, debts that hung over him like a shroud, suffocating him, reminding him of his station in life. He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making, and he saw no way out. He thought about his family, his mother, his sister, their faces etched with worry, their hopes pinned on his success in the city. He had promised them a better life, a life free from the poverty and hardship that had plagued them for generations. But instead of fulfilling his promise, he had become a burden, another mouth to feed, another worry to bear. The shame of it all was almost too much to bear. He had come to the city with dreams, with aspirations of grandeur. He was young, intelligent, capable. But somewhere along the way, he had lost his footing, had stumbled and fallen into a pit of despair he couldn't seem to climb out of. He clutched the small package in his pocket, his fingers tracing the outline of its contents. It was a desperate plan, a risky gamble, but in his current state he saw no other option. He had to do this. He had to try. The sun beat down on the city with an almost palpable intensity, turning the cobblestone streets into shimmering mirages of heat. The air was thick and heavy, laden with the stench of horse manure, rotting garbage, and human sweat. It was a smell that permeated everything, clinging to his clothes, his skin, his very being. He navigated the crowded streets with a practiced ease, his body weaving instinctively through the throngs of people. He barely registered the sights and sounds around him, his mind too consumed by his own thoughts, his own demons. Hawkers called out their wares in booming voices, their words washing over him in an unintelligible wave of sound. Carriages rattled by, their drivers cursing at pedestrians who dared to cross their path. The city was a living, breathing organism, pulsing with a chaotic energy that both exhilarated and terrified him. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand coming away grimy and damp. The heat was oppressive, suffocating, amplifying the sense of unease that gnawed at his insides. He felt faint, dizzy, his stomach churning with a mixture of hunger and anxiety. The tumult within, a mind divided. A battle raged within him, a war between his conscience and his desperation. He knew what he was about to do was wrong, a transgression against all that he held dear. The thought of it sent a shiver down his spine, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. But what choice did he have? His back was against the wall, his options dwindling with each passing day. His family was depending on him, their very survival hanging in the balance. He couldn't bear the thought of their faces etched with disappointment, their hopes dashed against the rocks of his failure. He tried to rationalize his actions, to convince himself that it was a necessary evil, a means to an end. He would repay the old woman, he told himself, every last penny. This was just a temporary loan, a bridge over troubled waters. But deep down he knew he was deluding himself. This was no act of borrowing but one of theft, of taking what was not his. the weight of his sin pressed down on him, threatening to crush him under its immense gravity. A ghost in the city's bustle. He walked with a hurried pace, his head down, his eyes fixed on the cracked pavement beneath his feet. He avoided eye contact with the people he passed, ashamed of his appearance, his threadbare clothes, the desperation etched on his face. He was a ghost in the city's bustle, invisible to the well-dressed men and women who went about their day, oblivious to the struggles of those less fortunate. They brushed past him without a second glance, their faces etched with indifference or disdain. He felt a surge of anger, of resentment, at their obliviousness, their privilege. What did they know of his struggles, of the weight of the world on his shoulders? They lived in their comfortable homes, their bellies full, their minds free from the worries that plagued him. He hated them for their ease, their comfort, their very existence. But most of all, he hated himself. He hated himself for his weakness, his failure, his inability to rise above his circumstances. The Old Woman's Abode. A Fateful Destination. He finally reached his destination, a dilapidated apartment building in one of the city's poorer neighborhoods. The paint was peeling, the windows were grimy, and a general air of neglect hung over the place like a shroud. He climbed the narrow staircase, his hand gripping the rusted railing for support. The air grew thicker, heavier with each step, the stench of urine and decay assaulting his nostrils. He paused outside the old woman's door, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear muffled voices coming from inside, the sound of a heated argument. He hesitated, his resolve wavering for a moment. But he had come too far to turn back now. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door, the sound echoing ominously in the silence that followed. He waited, his body tense, his mind racing. Trepidation at the threshold. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness within. A hunched figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from within. He could make out the outline of a woman, her face obscured by the shadows. "What do you want?" she rasped, her voice hoarse as if she hadn't used it in days. He stammered, his carefully rehearsed words failing him. He felt a wave of panic wash over him, threatening to overwhelm him. He had to say something, do something, but his mind was blank. I, he began, his voice barely a whisper. The old woman peered at him, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. He could feel her gaze boring into him, stripping away his pretense, exposing the fear and desperation that lay beneath. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. This was it, there was no turning back now.